Hello everybody, welcome to Little Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video and check us out over on Spotify, and that is the Rusty Buckets intro. One day I will stop doing that. In today's video, I want to talk about a take that I have had for a very long time, and it's not an uncommon take, but it's one that I feel like is left out of the conversation of all-time great discussions very often. And that is that the greatest player of all time conversation could have been very easily decided, and like in a way that is very hard to argue with, had Shaquille O'Neal just operated a little bit differently in his career. As happens a lot of the time, I'm scrolling Twitter and I saw a compilation of Orlando Magic Shaquille O'Neal, and I have just never been able to get over the fact that people perceive Lakers Shaq to be the overwhelmingly better player. And yeah, it's hard to argue, especially when you take into context his playoff success, that Shaq peaked better on the Los Angeles Lakers. I could agree to that take, specifically up through 2003, and he was there from 1996. So yeah, 7 seasons up until he really saw a huge decline. However, his last season, where he's putting up over 25 points per game, over 27 points per game in this instance, was that 2003 season when he was only 30 years old. And what had happened when he went to the Los Angeles Lakers is he gradually over time put on more and more weight. Now, something that pisses me off about Shaq and his playing career is he got a lot of excuses or justifications for this weight that did very dramatically hinder the potential of his career, both in terms of like just lower body injuries that didn't have to be as bad as they were, and then also just like he literally was on the court significantly less than he could have been. Like, he put on this weight, and the thing that people said was that made him more dominant. That made him all the more impossible to stop in the post. And while I completely understand how you could get that impression just purely aesthetically speaking, when we're talking about the truth of his production, Orlando Magic Shaq was a way better defender than Los Angeles Lakers Shaq, while still putting up very comparable numbers both in the regular season and the playoffs. A lot of people talk about that 1995 NBA Finals like Shaq completely shit his pants against Hakeem Olajuwon. Like, was Hakeem very obviously the better player between the two of them in the series? Yes, he was. However, if your version of getting shut down in the finals is averaging 28 points, 12.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and shooting 60% from the field, I think that says a lot about how goddamn good and dominant you are at the age of 22 years old against a guy who a lot of people very understandably consider to be the greatest defensive player the game has ever seen. That is saying a lot. Now, in his other finals, when he matched up against Dikembe Mutombo, who was A, not quite in his prime, but B, also very skinny and very easy to push around by contrast to all the other good stuff that he did on the defensive end. Ben Wallace obviously took his lunch money in 2004, but the other years where they went to the finals, they were playing cupcake matchups. Terrible, terrible, terrible centers, and Shaq also kind of saved his scoring energy for those finals. Like, a lot of his championship runs, specifically the last two, up until the finals, for those last two, it could be argued that Kobe was the better player through those first 3 rounds, but Shaq knows that the finals MVP and the finals is what really matters, and that's when he really, really, really goes try-hard mode, and it helps that he did not see a good matchup in the finals against him physically, besides for 1995 and besides for 2004. It did help that by 2004, Shaq's injuries dramatically hindered his ability, and he literally decreased his points per game by 6 per game. And in the playoffs that year in general, he also dropped those numbers. But I am going to take, other than his rookie year, so the last 3 years of his 4 in Orlando, in those seasons, he averaged 28.6 points, 12 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks. 4.2 of those rebounds were offensive boards. He shot 58.7% from the field. Meanwhile, if we take a look at his Lakers tenure before or up until 2003 in the regular season, 27.9 points, 11.9 rebounds, 2.5 blocks, 57.4% from the field, which is a little bit worse. So we are talking about virtually the same production across the board, virtually the same efficiency on said production. And then if we were to do the same thing with the playoff stats, his Orlando Magic numbers are a little bit lower in the playoffs. He goes down to 25.7 points, 11.2 rebounds, and 58.8% shooting from the field, which is really good. And then we get into playoffs for the Lakers up until 2003, 29 points, 13.4 rebounds, 2.5 blocks, which is basically the same. So yeah, 55% from the field, though. 55% from the field is a noteworthy decline, at least, but the production does increase by a pretty substantial margin. But what is important here, I can agree that Shaquille O'Neal got better at scoring and became harder to guard when he was healthy and he was the much bigger player. But he was so often not healthy as a result of it, and it meant that he had to conserve his energy on the defensive end of the floor far more than he did when he was in Orlando. When you watch Orlando Magic Shaq, you see the way he's moving. Like, Shaq was primarily known for being terrifying because of his size, but the thing is, he had much of that size while in Orlando because he's still 7'1" and he's still 250 pounds. His verticality, his athleticism that declined with time in a Lakers jersey was overwhelming out of the gate. And that athleticism could have persisted and been a staple of his game for a much longer period of time, which would have enabled him to still put up similar scoring production and still be a great defensive player, which Shaq was in Orlando. Now, Shaq's not a terrible defensive player by any means, nowhere near it, but his physical profile, his size, speed, athleticism in the NBA right out of the gate was incredibly impactful on the defensive end. I'm actually curious in terms of defensive rating. They were 12th, which is not great, but the year before he was there, they were 22nd. Big dip, and it's entirely Shaq. It's entirely Shaq that is responsible for that. So I personally strongly believe that if Shaquille O'Neal on the Lakers gained an extra 20 pounds but kept it there, kept up with his conditioning, used his energy on the defensive end, he could have been known way more as a two-way player. If Shaq's prime lasted until the age of 35 rather than the age of 30, he'd be the GOAT. And I don't even think it would be close, because when we're talking about peaks, imagine what Shaq did on the Lakers offensively speaking, but then you also have an all-time great defensive presence on the other end of the floor. And then you also have Kobe Bryant as a teammate who most of his issue and beef with Shaq was related to his work ethic, conditioning, and weight. You'd maintain that relationship for longer. You'd dominate on both ends of the floor for much longer in a way that is unprecedented throughout history, because there's nobody with better rim gravity than Shaquille fucking O'Neal. So much opportunity was wasted. And that's, it's hard to say that for a guy who's in almost everybody's top 10 players of all time. And Shaq is in my top 10 players of all time. But in terms of guys who are in that top 10, there is no one who underachieved to what their potential was more than Shaquille O'Neal. He definitely underachieved a little bit. It's hard to say something about that with someone who's as successful and as dominant as he was, but truly, Shaq could have been so much better for so much longer. And I think that just gets left out of the conversation with him a lot of the time. And I also just feel like Orlando Magic Shaq needs more attention just in a historical context, because when that man was firing on all cylinders, like his second and third seasons in the league, he averaged 29.3 points, 12.3 rebounds, 2.6 blocks, and 59.1% from the field. Like, just an unbelievable force of nature on both ends of the floor. It's disappointing that there was not more to come of it. And that's something that I can't help but feel whenever I watch Shaq play, which is definitely a negativity bias. It's definitely a negative skew. I still appreciate watching Shaq highlights in any jersey just because, well, mostly Lakers and Magic jerseys, let's be real. But the anomaly that he is physically, how much he was just built to play the game of basketball because of how unstoppable he was physically. It's just hard to quantify. I can never not think about the wasted potential whenever I think about Shaq. And I will highlight this in a more nuanced way in a deep dive at some point, because that Shaq hater manifesto will be coming out. Most of my beef with Shaq is related to his personality and who he chooses to be rather than his basketball shortcomings. That's just what I wanted to talk about, because it's something that I think about a lot. And this is my basketball diary channel anyway, so I figured I'd talk about how Shaq should have been the GOAT. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. That is it. Goodbye.